The scent of frying bacon dragged Isaac Harlow from sleep like a rope pulling him out of deep water, and when his eyes snapped open to find a woman standing at his cast-iron stove in the pale dawn light, every instinct told him to reach for the revolver under his pillow. He did not move. Instead, Isaac remained perfectly still in his narrow bed, tucked against the far wall of his one-room cabin, watching the stranger through half-closed eyes as she worked with practiced efficiency over his fire. She wore a travel-stained dress the color of dried sage, her dark blonde hair pinned up in a way that suggested she had done it hastily, perhaps in the dark. Her movements were quiet, careful not to wake him, and there was something about the slope of her shoulders that spoke of exhaustion so bone-deep it made his own body ache in sympathy. The bacon crackled and popped in the pan. She had found his eggs somehow, probably in the crate he kept outside where the night air kept them cool in his small root cellar. The coffee pot sat on the edge of the stove, already sending up thin wisps of steam. His coffee, his bacon, his eggs, in his kitchen. Isaac sat up slowly, the rope bed frame creaking beneath his weight. The woman's shoulders went rigid at the sound, but she did not turn around. He watched her hand still over the pan, saw her draw in a breath that made her whole body expand and then contract. "Morning," he said, his voice rough from sleep. She turned then, and Isaac found himself looking at a face that was pale with fear beneath a layer of trail dust. Her eyes were the color of creek water in summer, green with flecks of gold, and they were watching him with the wariness of a cornered animal. She could not have been more than 23 or 24, he guessed, though the lines of strain around her mouth might have added years that were not truly there. "I am sorry," she said, and her voice shook despite an obvious effort to keep it steady. "I know this is unforgivable. Breaking into your home, using your provisions. I will work to repay you, I promise. I just needed somewhere safe, and your cabin was the first I found, and I have not eaten in 2 days, and I thought perhaps if I made breakfast, you might be less inclined to shoot me immediately." She said it all in a rush, the words tumbling over each other like stones down a hillside. Isaac stood up from the bed, noting distantly that he had slept in his clothes again, his shirt wrinkled and his suspenders hanging loose at his sides. He was a tall man, broad through the shoulders from years of ranch work, and he saw her eyes track his movements as he crossed the small space between them. "Well," he said, pulling out one of the 2 chairs at his rough-hewn table. "Breakfast smells good. Might as well sit down and eat." The woman stared at him as though he had spoken in a foreign tongue. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "You are not going to ask me who I am, or why I am here, or throw me out. Figured I would do all that after breakfast," Isaac said, settling into his chair. "Food is already cooked. Seems a waste to let it get cold while we have a conversation." For a long moment, she simply looked at him, her expression suspended somewhere between disbelief and desperate hope. Then, moving as though she thought he might change his mind at any second, she quickly served the food onto his 2 tin plates. The portions were generous, more than he usually made for himself. She set one plate in front of him along with a fork, then hesitated before taking the other plate and sitting down in the chair across from him. They ate in silence. Isaac watched her try to pace herself, try to eat slowly, but hunger won out, and she consumed her food with an urgency that told him her claim of not having eaten for 2 days was likely true. He focused on his own plate, giving her what privacy he could, and found that the eggs were cooked perfectly, the bacon crisp but not burned, and the coffee, when he poured it, was exactly the right strength. When they had both finished, Isaac pushed his plate aside and leaned back in his chair. Outside, the sun was climbing higher over the Arizona landscape, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. It was early July of 1883, and Prescott was slowly waking up to another hot summer day. His cabin sat about 2 miles outside of town, close enough to ride in when he needed supplies or work, far enough out that he valued the solitude. "My name is Vivian Taylor," the woman said, breaking the silence before he could ask. "I came from Santa Fe. I have been traveling for 8 days." "That is a long way alone," Isaac said, keeping his tone neutral. "Dangerous, too. Not as dangerous as staying would have been." Vivian's hands were folded tightly on the table in front of her, her knuckles white. "My father arranged a marriage for me, to a man named Walter Gaines. He is 56 years old and has buried 3 wives already. I am 22. I told my father I would not marry him, and my father told me I had no choice in the matter, so I made a choice anyway. I left." Isaac absorbed this information, studying her face as she spoke. There was a stubborn set to her jaw that he recognized, the same determination he saw in his own reflection when he had decided something and would not be moved from it. "Your father send anyone after you?" "I do not know," she said honestly. "Perhaps, probably. Walter Gaines has money and influence, and my father owes him debts I was meant to settle with my hand in marriage. But I have been careful. I bought passage on a freight wagon heading west, and I told them my name was Victoria Smith, and I was going to meet my husband in Flagstaff. Then I got off in Prescott instead. I have been sleeping rough outside of town for 3 nights, trying to figure out what to do next. Last night was cold, and I saw your light, and I thought perhaps just for one night I might sleep somewhere with walls and a roof. Your door was not locked." "Nobody locks their doors out here," Isaac said. "No need, usually." "I am sorry," Vivian said again, and this time her voice cracked. "I know you have no reason to help me or believe me. I know I am asking too much already just by being here. But I have nowhere else to go, and I am so tired, and I promise I am a hard worker. I can cook and clean and mend and tend a garden. If you let me stay even just a few days, I will earn my keep. I will not be a burden." Isaac looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the desperation there. Saw the fear. Saw also the courage it must have taken to run from everything she knew, to travel hundreds of miles alone through country that could kill a person in dozens of ways, all to escape a fate she had not chosen. He thought about sending her away. Thought about the complications that would come from harboring a runaway woman in his cabin. Thought about how much simpler his life would be if he just pointed her toward town and wished her luck. "You can stay," he heard himself say. "For now, at least. We will figure out the rest as we go." The relief that washed over Vivian's face was so profound it was almost painful to witness. Her eyes filled with tears that she blinked back fiercely, her throat working as she swallowed. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you. I will not make you regret this." "Probably will anyway," Isaac said, but there was no heat in it. "I am Isaac Harlow. I work at the Prescott Ranch when they need hands, and I do odd jobs around town otherwise. This cabin is not much, but it keeps the rain out and the worst of the cold during winter. You can have the bed." "I will sleep outside." "I cannot take your bed," Vivian protested immediately. "This is your home. I am the intruder. I will sleep on the floor or outside or anywhere else." "You will sleep in the bed," Isaac said firmly. "I have slept under the stars more nights than I can count. A few more will not kill me. Besides, summer nights are warm enough. It is no hardship." They spent that first day in a kind of careful dance around each other, establishing the boundaries of this strange new arrangement. Vivian insisted on cleaning the cabin from top to bottom, scrubbing floors that Isaac had not realized were quite so dirty until he saw them clean. She washed his spare clothes and his bedding, hanging them on a line strung between 2 fence posts outside. She organized his supplies, such as they were, and made a list of things he was running low on. Isaac rode into town in the afternoon, ostensibly to see about work, but really to give her space and time to settle in without him watching. Prescott in the summer was a busy place, the main street crowded with wagons and horses and people going about their business. The town had grown considerably since it became the territorial capital of Arizona back in 1877, though it had lost that title to Phoenix just 2 years later. Still, it remained a prosperous place, full of miners and ranchers and merchants all trying to make their fortunes in the Arizona territory. He found work easily enough. The general store needed someone to unload a freight wagon that had come in from Phoenix, and Isaac spent 3 hours hauling crates and barrels in the blazing heat. The work was familiar, mindless, and it gave him time to think about what he had agreed to. A woman in his cabin. A runaway woman, no less, possibly with angry family or an angry, almost husband on her trail. It was foolish, dangerous even. He should have sent her on her way, but he had not, and he found he did not regret it. There had been something in her eyes, some desperate hope mixed with steel determination, that had spoken to him. Besides, Isaac Harlow had never been one to turn away someone who needed help, even when common sense said he should. He rode back to the cabin as the sun was starting its descent toward the horizon, the sky turning shades of orange and purple that only seemed to exist in the desert. When he approached, he could smell something cooking, something savory and rich that made his stomach remind him he had only eaten breakfast. Vivian was outside, tending to a small fire she had built in the ring of stones he used for outdoor cooking during the hottest months. A pot hung over the flames, and she stirred it with a long wooden spoon he had not even known he owned. "I found some beans and some salt pork," she said when she saw him approaching, "and some wild onions growing down by the creek. I hope you do not mind. I made enough for both of us." "Mind?" Isaac dismounted, tying his horse to the hitching post. "I cannot remember the last time someone cooked me dinner, or the last time I had anything more complicated than hardtack and jerky." They ate outside as the light faded, sitting on the ground with their backs against the cabin wall. The beans were good, seasoned with herbs she must have found growing wild somewhere. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the desert settling into evening. Coyotes called in the distance, their yips and howls echoing across the scrubland. "Tell me about yourself," Vivian said eventually. "It seems only fair since you know my sorry tale." Isaac shrugged. "Not much to tell. I am 26, been in Arizona territory for about 4 years now. Before that I was in Texas working cattle drives up to Kansas. Before that, I was in Missouri, growing up on a farm that my father lost to debts when I was 16. I have been working and moving ever since. No family. My mother died when I was 12. My father died 2 years ago from what I heard. I have a sister somewhere, married to a shopkeeper in St. Louis, but we have not spoken in years." He paused, considering whether to say more. "I suppose I am not much for staying in one place. Never saw the point in putting down roots when everything can be taken away so easily." Vivian was quiet for a moment, digesting this. "And yet you have this cabin. That is a kind of roots, is it not?" "Maybe," Isaac conceded. "Or maybe it is just a place to sleep between jobs. Hard to say." "I think it is more than that," Vivian said softly. "I think you want it to be more than that, even if you have not admitted it to yourself yet." Isaac did not respond to that because he suspected she might be right, and he was not ready to examine that thought too closely. Instead, he asked, "What about you? What are you going to do now that you are here?" "I do not know," Vivian admitted. "Find work somehow, save money. Build a life that is mine, not one chosen for me by men who see me as property to be traded." She looked down at her hands. "It sounds foolish when I say it out loud. A woman alone with no money and no prospects, thinking she can make her own way. But I would rather try and fail than never try at all." "It is not foolish," Isaac said. "Difficult maybe, but not foolish." They sat together until full dark, and then Isaac laid out his bedroll under the stars while Vivian retreated into the cabin. He lay awake for a long time, looking up at the vast expanse of sky above him, thinking about the strange turn his life had taken. Yesterday he had been alone, the way he had been for most of his adult life. Today he had a woman sleeping in his bed, a woman with green gold eyes and a stubborn streak a mile wide. He fell asleep wondering what tomorrow would bring. The next few days established a pattern. Isaac would wake to find Vivian already up and working, tending to whatever task she had set herself. She seemed driven by a need to prove her worth, to show that she could earn her place. She mended his clothes, patched holes in his roof he had been meaning to fix for months, tended a small vegetable garden she started near the creek. She was relentless in her efficiency. For his part, Isaac tried to give her space while also making sure she knew she was welcome. He continued to take work where he could find it, sometimes in town, sometimes at the Prescott Ranch where the foreman knew him as a reliable hand. He brought home his wages, and Vivian used them to stretch their supplies further than Isaac had ever managed on his own. They talked in the evenings, those long summer twilights when the heat finally broke and the desert became almost pleasant. Isaac learned that Vivian had been educated by a governess until she was 16, that she loved books, and had left behind a small library when she fled Santa Fe. Vivian learned that Isaac could read but had never had much patience for it, that he preferred the physical exhaustion of hard work to the stillness of sitting with a book. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that took her by surprise, that he was kinder than his rough exterior suggested. He learned that she was whip-smart and funny when she felt safe enough to relax, that her laugh was like music in the quiet of his cabin. 2 weeks after Vivian arrived, Isaac came home from town with news. "The hotel in Prescott is looking for a housekeeper," he said as they prepared dinner together. "I asked around. The work is hard, but the pay is decent and they provide 1 meal a day. I told Mrs. Henderson, who runs the place, that I knew someone who might be interested. She said you could come by tomorrow to talk to her about it." Vivian went very still, her hands pausing in their work of slicing bread. "You told her about me." "I told her I knew a woman new to Prescott who was looking for work," Isaac said carefully. "I did not tell her anything else. As far as Mrs. Henderson knows, you are a widow who came west looking for a fresh start. If that story suits you, use it. If not, make up your own. But I thought you would want to know about the job." Vivian set down the knife and turned to face him fully. "Isaac," she said, and there was something in her voice he could not quite identify. "Why are you doing this? Why are you helping me so much?" He considered the question, really considered it. The honest answer was that he was not entirely sure himself. Yes, he had always been the type to help someone in need, but this felt like more than that. Somewhere in the past 2 weeks, Vivian had stopped being just a stranger in his cabin and had become something else. A friend, maybe, or the beginning of one. "Because you deserve help," he said finally. "Because you were brave enough to run toward an uncertain future instead of accepting a certain terrible one. And because I like having you here." The last part slipped out before he could stop it, honest and raw. Vivian's eyes widened slightly, and a flush crept up her neck into her cheeks. "I like being here," she said quietly. "More than I should, probably." They looked at each other across the small space of the cabin, and something shifted in the air between them. It was Isaac who looked away first, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how easy it would be to reach out and touch her hand. "You should take the job," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "If you want it, give you some independence, some money of your own." "I will go talk to Mrs. Henderson tomorrow," Vivian agreed. "Thank you for thinking of me." Vivian got the job. Mrs. Henderson was a practical woman in her 50s who had been running the Prescott Hotel for a decade. She asked Vivian few personal questions and seemed satisfied with the story about being a widow seeking a new start. The work was indeed hard, changing linens and scrubbing floors and hauling water, but Vivian attacked it with the same fierce determination she brought to everything else. She worked 6 days a week, leaving the cabin early in the morning and returning in the late afternoon. Isaac found he missed her presence during the day more than he had expected. The cabin felt too quiet without her, too empty. He started timing his own work so he would be home when she returned, and he looked forward to those evenings together more than he cared to admit. One evening in late July, Isaac returned from a long day at the ranch to find Vivian sitting outside the cabin with her head in her hands. He was off his horse in an instant, crossing to her side. "What happened? Are you hurt?" She looked up, and he saw that her eyes were red-rimmed, though whether from tears or exhaustion he could not tell. "I am fine," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Just a hard day." Isaac sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Want to talk about it?" For a long moment, Vivian said nothing. Then the words came tumbling out. "There was a man at the hotel today, a guest from Santa Fe. I do not think he recognized me, but he was talking to one of the other guests at dinner, and I heard him mention Walter Gaines. He said Walter was offering a reward for information about a missing woman, his intended bride who ran away. He described me, Isaac. My height, my hair color, everything." Ice formed in Isaac's gut. "Did this man see you?" "I do not know. I left the dining room as quickly as I could without running. But if he did, if he makes the connection, he could tell Walter where I am. And then—" She trailed off, but the fear in her voice said everything. Isaac thought quickly, weighing options. "We could leave," he said. "Pack up tonight, be in Flagstaff by tomorrow night, or California, or anywhere else you want to go." Vivian turned to look at him, surprise clear on her face. You think I am going to let you run alone again?" Isaac said it without thinking, but as soon as the words were out, he knew they were true. "If you need to leave, I am going with you." "Isaac, I cannot ask you to do that. This is your home, your life. You cannot just abandon everything because of my problems." "You are not asking, I am offering." He met her eyes, held her gaze. "And as for my life, well, I told you I never was much for staying in one place anyway. Besides, there is nothing here I would miss if I left." "Nothing." Vivian's voice was soft, uncertain. "Nothing except you," Isaac said, and there it was, the truth laid bare between them. "And you would be coming with me, so that settles that." Vivian's breath caught. "Isaac, we do not have to decide tonight," he said, even though his heart was hammering in his chest. "Let us see what tomorrow brings. Maybe that man did not recognize you. Maybe he was already gone when you left. We will wait and watch, and if it seems like trouble is coming, we will go." But Vivian was not listening anymore. She was looking at him with an expression he could not quite read, something tender and fierce all at once. "You would really leave everything for me, when you have known me less than a month?" "Seems I would," Isaac said simply. "Though I am not sure I can explain why, except that it feels right. You being here feels right. The thought of you leaving, of you being scared and alone again, feels wrong in a way I cannot ignore." "Oh," Vivian said, and then she was crying, tears streaming down her face. But she was also smiling, a bright, genuine smile that transformed her whole face. "I was trying so hard not to feel this way. I told myself it was foolish, that I was just grateful for your help, that I was mistaking kindness for something else. But I cannot help it, Isaac. I cannot help the way my heart lifts when I see you coming home. I cannot help how much I look forward to our evenings together. I cannot help that I am falling in love with you, even though we have only known each other such a short time. Isaac felt something in his chest crack open, some wall he had been holding up for years crumbling to dust. Then do not help it, he said roughly. Because I am falling too, Vivian. Have been since you made me breakfast that first morning and looked at me like you were ready to fight the whole world if you had to. They came together without either of them quite deciding to move, closing the small distance between them. Isaac cupped her face in his hands, rough and calloused against her soft skin, and Vivian reached up to cover his hands with hers. They stayed like that for a heartbeat too, and then Isaac leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, a question more than a demand. But when Vivian sighed against his mouth and pressed closer, the kiss deepened. It was like nothing Isaac had ever felt before, this rush of tenderness and desire all mixed together. He had kissed women before, but never like this. Never with this feeling of coming home. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Vivian rested her forehead against his. "What are we going to do?" she whispered. "We are going to figure it out," Isaac said. "Together. Whatever comes, we face it together." "Together," Vivian repeated, and the word sounded like a promise. They sat outside under the stars for hours that night, wrapped in each other's arms, talking and planning and occasionally stopping to kiss again. They agreed to wait a few days to see if the man from Santa Fe caused any trouble. If he did, they would leave. If not, they would stay and build whatever this was between them. The next few days passed in a kind of tense anticipation. Vivian went to work as usual, but she was careful to avoid the dining room during meal times. Isaac found excuses to come into town more often, checking the hotel from a distance, watching for any signs of trouble. The man from Santa Fe checked out after 3 days, and as far as they could tell, he had not recognized Vivian or mentioned her to anyone. The danger passed, or seemed to, but something fundamental had changed between Isaac and Vivian. Now when they sat together in the evenings, they sat close, hands entwined. Now when Isaac came home from work, Vivian greeted him with a kiss that made his heart race. Now when they said good night, it was with increasing reluctance, both of them wishing things could be different. 2 months after Vivian first appeared in his cabin, Isaac woke in his bedroll under the stars to find her standing over him in the pre-dawn darkness. "Come inside," she said softly. "Please, I do not want to sleep alone anymore." Isaac sat up, fully awake in an instant. "Vivian, your reputation, if anyone found out." "I do not care about my reputation," Vivian said fiercely. "I do not care what anyone thinks. I only care about you, about us. And I am tired of pretending that we are not both dying to be closer than these ridiculous sleeping arrangements allow." She held out her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Isaac took it. She led him into the cabin, to the bed that had been hers alone for 2 months. They lay down together, fully clothed, and Isaac pulled her close against his chest. She fit there perfectly, her head tucked under his chin, her arm draped across his waist. "This is all I wanted," Vivian murmured, already half asleep. "Just this, just you holding me." Isaac pressed a kiss to the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I am here," he said softly. "I am right here." They slept that way, wrapped around each other, and when Isaac woke to the sun streaming through the cabin window, Vivian still in his arms, he felt a peace he had not known in years. Maybe ever. From that night on, they shared the bed. They took things slowly, mindful of propriety even as they pushed against its boundaries. There were kisses and touches, tender explorations in the darkness, but they both seemed to understand without saying that they were waiting for something. Waiting until they could make this official, make it right. It was Isaac who brought up marriage first, one evening in early September when the brutal heat of summer was finally starting to break. They were sitting outside, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors when he said, "Marry me." Vivian turned to look at him, her eyes wide. "What? Marry me?" Isaac repeated. "I know it has only been a few months. I know we should probably wait longer, do this properly. But I do not want to wait, Vivian. I want you to be my wife. I want this to be our home, not just mine. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life and know that you are mine and I am yours, completely and legally and in every way that matters." "Yes," Vivian said, and then she was laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. I do not care if it has only been a few months. I do not care if it is fast. I know what I feel and I know what I want, and I want you, Isaac Harlow. I want to be your wife more than I have ever wanted anything." They were married a week later in a small ceremony at the church in Prescott. Mrs. Henderson stood as Vivian's witness, and the ranch foreman stood for Isaac. Vivian wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her make, and Isaac wore his cleanest shirt and his only suit jacket. The minister asked if anyone objected to the union, and Isaac found himself holding his breath, half expecting Walter Gaines or Vivian's father to burst through the doors. No one did. The minister pronounced them man and wife, and Isaac kissed his bride there in the small church with the Arizona sun streaming through the windows, and felt like the luckiest man alive. They had a wedding dinner at the hotel, just the four of them, and Mrs. Henderson gave them a bottle of good whiskey as a wedding gift. The ranch foreman gave them a beautiful quilt his wife had made, perfect for the cold Arizona winter nights to come. They rode back to the cabin, to their home now, as the sun was setting, and Vivian laughed with pure joy when Isaac swept her up in his arms and carried her over the threshold. That night, for the first time, they came together as husband and wife. It was tender and sweet and occasionally awkward in the way first times often are, but it was also perfect. Vivian fit in Isaac's arms like she had been made for exactly that purpose, and when he moved inside her, when he heard her gasp his name, he felt complete in a way he never had before. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the bed that was now truly theirs, and Vivian traced idle patterns on Isaac's chest with her fingertips. "I used to think my life was over," she said softly. "When my father told me I had to marry Walter Gaines, I thought that was it. Every good thing I could have hoped for gone, and now look at me. I am married to a man I love desperately, living in a home I cherish with a future that is mine to shape. It feels like a miracle." "No miracle," Isaac said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Just you being brave enough to run, and me being lucky enough that you ran to my door." The autumn passed in a kind of golden happiness that neither of them had expected. Isaac continued working at the ranch and taking odd jobs, while Vivian kept her position at the hotel. They saved their money carefully, planning for the future. Isaac talked about maybe buying some land of their own someday, starting a small ranch. Vivian talked about maybe opening a boarding house, using her skills to build something that could support them both. They made friends in Prescott, gradually becoming part of the community. People accepted Vivian's story about being a widow who had come west for a new start, and if anyone thought it strange that she had married again so quickly, they kept it to themselves. In a territory where women were scarce and life was hard, quick marriages were not uncommon. Winter came to Arizona, bringing cold nights if not the brutal snows that Isaac remembered from his childhood in Missouri. He and Vivian would huddle together under the quilt the foreman's wife had made, sharing warmth and whispered conversations in the darkness. Sometimes they would talk for hours, learning each other's histories and dreams. Sometimes they would make love with a passion that never seemed to dim. Sometimes they would simply hold each other, grateful for the warmth and safety of being together. It was in January of 1884, 5 months after their wedding, that Vivian started feeling sick in the mornings. At first she dismissed it as something she ate, but when it continued for a week, then 2, Isaac insisted she see the doctor. Vivian came home from that appointment with a strange look on her face, somewhere between shocked and delighted. "I am with child," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "The doctor says I am about 2 months along, which means the baby should come in July. We are going to have a baby, Isaac." Isaac felt his knees go weak. He sat down heavily in one of the chairs, staring at Vivian as the news sank in. A baby. Their baby. He was going to be a father. "Are you upset?" Vivian asked, suddenly uncertain. "I know we did not plan this, I know it is fast, but—" "Upset?" Isaac stood up, crossed to her, pulled her into his arms. "Vivian, I am terrified. I have no idea how to be a father, but upset. No, I am so happy I can barely breathe. We are going to have a baby." Vivian melted against him, relief evident in every line of her body. "I am terrified too," she admitted, "but I am also so happy. I want this, Isaac. I want a family with you. I want to raise children in a home full of love, the kind of home I never had growing up." "Then that is what we will give them," Isaac said firmly. "A home full of love where they are wanted and cherished and free to make their own choices." As Vivian's pregnancy progressed, Isaac found himself becoming increasingly protective. He insisted she cut back her hours at the hotel, then eventually leave the position altogether when she started showing. Mrs. Henderson was understanding, even giving Vivian a generous parting bonus and telling her there would be a job waiting whenever she wanted to come back. Isaac took on extra work to make up for the lost income, sometimes working from before dawn until after dark. It was exhausting, but every time he felt like complaining, he would come home to Vivian, to her growing belly and her bright smile, and remember why he was doing it. They spent their evenings preparing for the baby's arrival. Vivian sewed tiny clothes from fabric scraps that Mrs. Henderson donated. Isaac built a cradle from wood he salvaged and traded for, sanding it smooth so there would be no rough edges to hurt tender baby skin. They argued good-naturedly about names, Isaac favoring strong, simple names while Vivian wanted something more elegant. In late June, when Vivian was huge and uncomfortable in the summer heat, Isaac came home from work to find a stranger's horse tied outside their cabin. His hand went instinctively to the gun at his hip, and he approached cautiously, every sense on alert. He pushed open the cabin door to find Vivian sitting at the table across from a man Isaac did not recognize. The man was well-dressed, probably in his 50s, with graying hair and the kind of soft hands that said he had never done a day's hard labor in his life. Vivian's face was pale, her hands clenched together on the table in front of her. "Isaac," she said, and her voice shook. "This is Walter Gaines." Isaac felt rage flash through him, hot and immediate. This was the man who had tried to buy Vivian like property, the man she had fled across hundreds of miles to escape. "Get out of my house," he said, his voice deadly quiet. Walter Gaines stood up slowly, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "I mean no harm, Mr. Harlow. I only came to talk to Vivian. To Miss Taylor, I mean." "It is Mrs. Harlow," Isaac corrected, moving to stand beside Vivian, his hand on her shoulder. "And you were just leaving." "Please," Gaines said, and there was something in his voice that made Isaac pause. "Just give me 5 minutes. That is all I ask. 5 minutes to say what I came to say, and then I will leave and never bother you again." Isaac looked down at Vivian, letting her make the choice. She looked terrified, but she nodded slightly. 5 minutes, she said. Gaines sat back down and Isaac remained standing, his hand still on Vivian's shoulder. The older man looked at Vivian, and his expression was sad in a way that Isaac had not expected. "I owe you an apology," Gaines said. "Several apologies, in fact. I was wrong to agree to your father's arrangement. Wrong to think that a woman so young would be willing to marry a man my age, no matter the financial incentives. Wrong to not see that the entire situation was nothing more than your father selling you to settle his debts." Vivian's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that when you disappeared, it forced me to take a hard look at myself and my actions. I spent some time thinking about my 3 late wives, about whether they had truly been happy or whether they had simply been trapped in marriages they could not escape. I did not like the answers I found." Gaines folded his hands on the table. "Your father hired men to find you. Did you know that? He told them to bring you back by any means necessary. I found out about it 2 weeks ago, and I paid them off and sent them away. As far as your father knows, you vanished without a trace." "Why would you do that?" Vivian whispered. "Because you deserve to be happy," Gaines said simply. "Because you deserve to choose your own life. And because I am trying, in my final years, to be a better man than I have been. I came here today not to take you back, but to give you peace. Your father will not bother you again. I have made sure of it. He owes me too much money to dare cross me, and I have made it clear that if he sends anyone after you, I will call in all his debts immediately. He cannot afford that." Isaac felt Vivian trembling under his hand. Whether from relief or shock or both, he could not tell. "I do not understand," she said. "Why are you helping me? Consider it an old man's attempt at redemption," Gaines said, standing up. He looked at Isaac for the first time, really looked at him. "Take care of her. Love her the way she deserves to be loved. Give her the life I never could have given her." "I will," Isaac said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Gaines tipped his hat to Vivian, nodded to Isaac, and left. They heard his horse ride away, the sound fading into the distance. Vivian sat frozen for a long moment, then suddenly she was crying, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Isaac pulled her up into his arms, holding her as she cried out months of fear and tension. "It is over," she kept saying through her tears. "It is really over. I am safe. We are safe." "You are safe," Isaac confirmed, his own voice thick with emotion. "You have always been safe with me, but now you do not have to look over your shoulder anymore. Now you can just be here, just be ours." They held each other until Vivian's tears subsided, and then they sat together at the table, hands intertwined, as the reality of their new freedom sank in. No more running, no more fear. Just their life together, stretching out before them full of possibility. 3 weeks later, on a hot July night, Vivian went into labor. Isaac rode into town in a panic to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Sarah, who had delivered half the babies in Prescott. She came back to the cabin with him, took one look at Vivian, and ordered Isaac to boil water and stay out of the way. It was the longest night of Isaac's life. He paced outside the cabin, listening to Vivian's cries of pain, feeling utterly helpless. Mrs. Henderson showed up at some point, brought by some mysterious female communication network Isaac did not understand. She went into the cabin and stayed, and her presence seemed to calm things somehow. Dawn was breaking when Isaac heard a new sound, a thin, wailing cry that made his heart stop. He was at the cabin door in an instant, pushing inside to find Sarah holding a tiny, red-faced, squalling infant wrapped in a clean cloth. "You have a son, Mr. Harlow," Sarah said, smiling. "A healthy, strong son." Isaac's eyes went immediately to Vivian, who was propped up in bed, pale and exhausted but smiling. "A son," she said softly. "We have a son, Isaac." Sarah placed the baby in Vivian's arms, and Isaac moved to sit on the edge of the bed, looking down at the tiny person they had created. He was perfect, small and red and wrinkled, but perfect. Isaac reached out with one finger to touch the baby's hand, and the tiny fingers closed around his, gripping with surprising strength. "What should we name him?" Vivian asked. They had discussed names endlessly, but now, looking at his son, Isaac knew. "James," he said. "James Harlow. It was my grandfather's name. He was a good man, the best I knew when I was growing up." "James," Vivian repeated, testing it out. She looked down at the baby and smiled. "James Harlow." "It is perfect." The next few months were a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. Isaac had never known he could love something so much, this tiny person who depended on them for everything. He would wake in the night to the sound of James crying and watch Vivian feed him, and feel his heart swell so large he thought it might burst from his chest. He took on less work, so he could be home more, helping Vivian with the endless tasks that came with caring for an infant. They were tired all the time, sometimes snapping at each other from exhaustion, but underneath it all was a deep current of joy. They were a family now, complete and whole. James thrived. He grew quickly, changing from a wrinkled newborn into a chubby baby with his mother's green gold eyes and his father's dark hair. By the time he was 6 months old, he was already trying to crawl, determined and stubborn in a way that reminded Isaac of both of them. It was around this time that Isaac came home from town with news. "The Henderson Ranch is selling," he said. 500 acres, good grazing land, a decent house and barn. The price is more than fair because old Henderson wants to move to California to be near his daughter." Vivian looked up from where she was playing with James on the floor. "Can we afford it?" "Just barely," Isaac admitted. "If we use everything we have saved and if I can get a loan from the bank for the rest. But it would be ours, Vivian. Our own land, our own ranch. A place to raise James and any other children we might have. A real home." "This is already a real home," Vivian said softly. "But I understand what you mean. A place that is truly ours that no one can take from us. Yes, Isaac, let us do it. Let us buy the ranch." It took a month to finalize the sale. A month of negotiations and paperwork and nail-biting worry that the bank would refuse the loan. But in the end, in September of 1884, Isaac and Vivian Harlow became the owners of the Henderson Ranch, renamed by mutual agreement to simply the Harlow Ranch. The house was bigger than their cabin, with 2 bedrooms and a real kitchen and a sitting room with a fireplace. The barn needed some work, but it was structurally sound. The land was good, better than good, with a creek running through it and plenty of grazing. It would be hard work to make the ranch successful, but Isaac had never been afraid of hard work. They moved in on a crisp autumn day, loading their few possessions into a borrowed wagon. As they drove away from the cabin where they had started their life together, Vivian reached over and took Isaac's hand. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For all of it. For taking me in when I had nowhere else to go, for loving me, for building this life with me, for being the man you are." Isaac squeezed her hand, looking over at her with James sleeping in her lap. "I should be thanking you. You walked into my life and changed everything. You made me want to stay in one place, want to build something lasting. You gave me a family, a real home. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Vivian Harlow." She leaned over and kissed him, soft and sweet, and James stirred in his sleep but did not wake. They drove the rest of the way to their new home in comfortable silence, both of them thinking about the future they were building together. The first year on the ranch was hard. Isaac worked from before dawn until after dark, building fences, repairing the barn, buying cattle with money he borrowed from the bank. Vivian managed the house and cared for James while also starting a large vegetable garden and learning to preserve food for the winter. They collapsed into bed every night exhausted, but satisfied with what they were accomplishing. Slowly, the ranch began to thrive. Isaac hired a couple of ranch hands to help with the work, young men who were glad for the steady employment. The cattle multiplied, and the garden produced bountifully. By their second year, they were able to pay off half the bank loan, a feat that made the banker shake his head in amazement. James grew from a baby into a toddler, curious and energetic, and constantly getting into everything. Isaac taught him to ride before he could properly walk, sitting him on a gentle old mare and leading her around the yard while James shrieked with laughter. Vivian taught him his letters and numbers, starting his education early. In the spring of 1886, Vivian told Isaac she was pregnant again. This time, the news was met with excitement rather than shock. They were ready for another child, eager to expand their family. Vivian's pregnancy was easier than the first one, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or perhaps because she was not working herself to exhaustion at the hotel. Their daughter was born in October, as the leaves on the cottonwood trees along the creek were turning gold. The birth was faster than James's had been, and when Sarah the midwife placed the baby in Vivian's arms, Isaac saw tears of joy streaming down his wife's face. "A daughter," Vivian whispered. "We have a daughter, Isaac. What should we call her?" Isaac asked, gently touching the baby's soft cheek. "Elizabeth," Vivian said without hesitation, "after my mother. She died when I was young, but I remember her kindness. I want our daughter to have her name." "Elizabeth Harlow," Isaac said, smiling. "It is perfect." Elizabeth was different from James in every way. Where he had been loud and demanding, she was quiet and content. Where he had fought sleep at every opportunity, she slept peacefully for hours at a time. James, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything even when his help was more hindrance than assistance. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful in the area. Isaac hired more help, including a foreman who could manage things when Isaac needed to focus on other aspects of the business. Vivian started taking in orphan children from Prescott, giving them a home and a family until permanent placements could be found. The house was often full of noise and laughter and the organized chaos of many children. In 1889, Vivian gave birth to another son, whom they named Thomas. In 1891, another daughter arrived, named Caroline. Their family grew, and the house expanded with it, as Isaac added rooms to accommodate everyone. Through it all, through the hard work and the sleepless nights and the occasional setbacks, Isaac and Vivian's love for each other only deepened. They still made time to sit together on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in colors that never seemed to fade. They still held hands and stole kisses when the children were not looking. They still talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning new facets of each other even after years of marriage. One evening in the summer of 1893, 10 years after Vivian had first walked into Isaac's cabin and made him breakfast, they sat together on that same porch. The children were all in bed, the ranch was quiet, and the stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Isaac asked, his arm around Vivian's shoulders. "Running away from Santa Fe, ending up here, all of it." Vivian turned to look at him, her eyes bright in the fading light. "Not for a single second. That decision, to run toward the unknown instead of accepting a life I did not want, it was the bravest thing I ever did. And it led me to you, to this life, to everything I hold dear." "How could I regret that? I am glad you ran," Isaac said, Glad you broke into my cabin and cooked me breakfast. Glad you stayed. Glad you chose me." "I would choose you again," Vivian said softly. "Every single time in every possible world I would choose you." Isaac pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. Inside the house, one of the children called out in their sleep, then settled. A coyote howled in the distance, that wild, lonely sound that was the voice of the desert. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and a cool breeze brought the scent of sage and earth. "Tell me what you see when you look at our future," Vivian said. "What do you hope for?" Isaac considered the question, looking out over the land they had built a life on. "I see our children growing up strong and free, making their own choices, living their own lives. I see the ranch continuing to thrive, providing for our family and our workers. I see grandchildren, eventually, filling this house with laughter the way our children do now. But mostly, I see you and me, growing old together, still sitting on this porch, still holding hands, still choosing each other every single day." "That sounds perfect," Vivian said, and there was such contentment in her voice that Isaac felt it resonate in his own chest. "That is exactly what I see too." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, and then Vivian stood up, tugging Isaac to his feet. "Come to bed," she said. "We have an early morning tomorrow, and I want to fall asleep in your arms." They went inside together, checking on each of their sleeping children before retiring to their own room. As they settled into bed, wrapped around each other in the way that had become as natural as breathing, Isaac felt a profound gratitude for the twists of fate that had brought them together. The years continued to flow like water, bringing changes and challenges and joys. James grew into a young man who was as passionate about ranching as his father, taking on more and more responsibility with each passing year. Elizabeth became a teacher, opening a small school on the ranch for the children of their workers and the surrounding farms. Thomas showed an aptitude for horses, training them with a patience and skill that amazed everyone who watched him work. Caroline, the youngest, was still finding her path, but she had her mother's fierce determination and her father's steady strength. The ranch expanded over the years as Isaac bought adjacent properties when they became available. By 1900, the Harlow Ranch was one of the largest and most successful operations in the Arizona Territory. But success had not changed the fundamental nature of Isaac and Vivian's relationship. They were still partners in every sense of the word, still friends and lovers and each other's greatest supporters. Mrs. Henderson passed away in 1895, leaving the hotel to Vivian in her will. Vivian sold it and used the money to start a home for women fleeing difficult situations, a safe place where they could stay while they figured out their next steps. She called it Henderson House in honor of the woman who had given her a chance when she needed it most. Isaac supported the endeavor fully, understanding better than most how important such a place could be. In 1902, Isaac woke up on a morning much like that first morning 19 years earlier, except now the bed was bigger, the house was grander, and the woman beside him was his wife of 18 years. Vivian was still asleep, her dark blonde hair, now streaked with gray, spread across the pillow. The lines on her face were deeper now, carved by years of laughter and hard work and raising children, but to Isaac she was as beautiful as she had been the day he first saw her standing at his stove. He slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake her, and went to make coffee. It was a Saturday, and the children were all home, though James had his own house on the property now with his new wife. The others were still asleep, enjoying the rare luxury of a morning without chores demanding immediate attention. Isaac stood at the window, looking out over the land they had built a life on, and felt a deep sense of peace. He thought about that morning so long ago when he had woken to find a stranger in his kitchen, how easily he could have sent her away. How different his life would have been if he had. How empty. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to find Vivian standing there in her nightgown, her hair tousled from sleep. "Good morning," she said, crossing to him and wrapping her arms around his waist. "What are you thinking about?" "About that first morning," Isaac said, putting his arms around her. "When you made me breakfast and I sat down and ate, and neither of us knew what was going to happen next." Vivian smiled against his chest. "I was so scared that morning. Terrified you would throw me out or turn me over to the law. But you did not. You showed me kindness when I desperately needed it, and that kindness changed everything." "You changed everything," Isaac corrected. "You walked into my life and made me want things I had given up on. Made me believe in the possibility of home and family and a future worth building." They stood together as the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. From one of the bedrooms, they heard Elizabeth stirring, then Thomas's heavier footsteps on the stairs. The house was waking up, their family beginning another day. "I love you," Vivian said, pulling back to look up at Isaac. "I have loved you for 19 years, and I will love you for all the years to come. Thank you for being the man you are. Thank you for choosing me." "Always," Isaac said, and kissed her there in the kitchen where their story had begun, with the coffee brewing and the children waking and the day stretching out before them. "I will always choose you." The years that followed were kind to the Harlow family. James and his wife gave Isaac and Vivian their first grandchild in 1903, a boy they named Isaac after his grandfather. Elizabeth married a doctor from Prescott in 1904, and they settled in town where she continued teaching. Thomas started his own horse training business on a corner of the ranch property, building a reputation across the territory. Caroline, true to her independent nature, went to college in California, one of the first women from Prescott to do so. Arizona became a state in 1912, an event the Harlow family celebrated with a large gathering at the ranch. Friends and family came from all over, filling the house and yard with noise and laughter. Isaac, now 55 years old, made a toast to the future of their new state and to the family that had thrived in it. Vivian, at 51, was still beautiful, still vibrant, still the center of Isaac's world. They danced that night under the stars, the same stars they had sat under so many years ago when everything was new and uncertain. Now, everything was settled and sure, built on a foundation of love that had only grown stronger with time. "We did good, did we not?" Vivian said as they swayed to the music being played by a band James had hired for the occasion. "We did very good," Isaac agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible. Do you remember that first breakfast?" Vivian asked, a question she had asked many times over the years and would ask many times more. "I remember everything about that day," Isaac said. "The smell of bacon frying, the way you looked at me like you were ready to bolt if I made one wrong move, the courage it took for you to ask if you could stay. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met." "I was desperate," Vivian corrected with a laugh. "You were brave," Isaac insisted. "And you still are. Every day you are brave." As the party continued around them, as their children and grandchildren celebrated, Isaac and Vivian held each other close and swayed to the music. They had built a life together from nothing, from a chance encounter and a shared breakfast, and a decision to take a risk on each other. They had weathered hardships and celebrated triumphs, had raised children and built a legacy that would outlast them both. The ranch continued to prosper under James's management, with Thomas's horse training business adding another stream of income. Elizabeth's school had expanded, now teaching over 30 children from the surrounding area. Caroline had graduated college and was working as a journalist in Phoenix, writing articles about women's rights and social reform. In 1915, Isaac and Vivian celebrated their 31st wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner, just the two of them. They had grandchildren sleeping in the bedrooms upstairs and James and his family in the house next door, but for this one evening it was just them. 31 years, Vivian said, raising her glass. Can you believe it? Some days it feels like a lifetime, Isaac said. Other days it feels like no time at all. I know what you mean, Vivian said. I look back at that frightened girl who broke into your cabin and she seems like a stranger, but I also remember exactly how she felt, how desperate and afraid and yet somehow hopeful. What would you tell her if you could? Isaac asked. That young woman, if you could go back and speak to her. Vivian thought about it for a moment. I would tell her that she is making the right choice, that running toward the unknown is better than staying in a certain misery. I would tell her that she is going to find love, real love, the kind that lasts and grows and sustains you through everything life throws at you. I would tell her that she is stronger than she knows and braver, and that everything is going to be all right. What would you tell him? Vivian asked. That cowboy who woke up to find a stranger in his kitchen. Isaac smiled. I would tell him to sit down and eat. I would tell him to listen to his heart instead of his head for once. I would tell him that this strange woman is going to turn his whole world upside down in the best possible way. And I would tell him to not waste a single moment once he realizes he is falling in love with her, because every moment with her is precious. They finished their dinner and went out to sit on the porch, the same porch where they had spent countless evenings over the years. The stars were bright overhead, the air was cool with the promise of autumn, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called out to the night. You have any regrets? Isaac asked, the same question he had asked years ago. Not a single one, Vivian said, the same answer she always gave. This life we built, this family, this love between us, it is everything I could have wanted and more than I dared to hope for. What about you? My only regret is that we do not have more time, Isaac said honestly. That life is finite and someday this will end. But even that is not really a regret, because the time we have had has been so full, so rich, that I cannot complain. I have been blessed beyond measure, and it is all because you walked into my cabin one morning and made me breakfast. Vivian took his hand, lacing their fingers together. We still have time, she said softly. Years and years if we are lucky, and I intend to make the most of every single day. They did have years, as it turned out. They saw the country through the Great War, worried as young men from Prescott went off to fight in distant lands. They celebrated when those young men came home and mourned the ones who did not. They saw their grandchildren grow up and start families of their own, adding great-grandchildren to the family tree. In 1925, on a warm summer evening very much like the one when they had first kissed, Isaac and Vivian sat together on their porch. Isaac was 68 now, his hair completely gray, his face weathered by decades of Arizona sun. Vivian was 64, still sharp and vital despite the years. They held hands as they watched the sunset, a ritual they had maintained for over 40 years. I was thinking about that stranger who made me breakfast, Isaac said suddenly. Vivian laughed, the sound still as bright and joyful as it had been when she was young. Were you now? I was thinking about how I sat down and ate and how that simple act changed everything. If I had sent you away, if I had been angry instead of curious, if I had let fear guide me instead of compassion, my whole life would have been different, empty. But you did not send me away, Vivian said. You showed me kindness, and that kindness saved my life. It gave me a future I never could have imagined. You gave me a future too, Isaac said. A home, a family, a reason to wake up every morning. You gave me love, Vivian. Real, lasting, transformative love. They sat in silence for a while, comfortable in each other's presence the way only people who have lived together for decades can be. The ranch stretched out around them, testament to what they had built together. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried their legacy forward. But in that moment, it was just the two of them, two people who had found each other against all odds and had chosen each other every day since. "You remember the exact moment you knew you loved me?" Vivian asked, another question she had asked before, but always enjoyed hearing the answer to. "I remember several moments," Isaac said. "The first time you laughed at something I said, and I realized I wanted to make you laugh every day for the rest of my life. The time you stood up to that drunk cowboy in town who was harassing a young girl, even though you were half his size. The night you told me you were pregnant with James, and I saw our whole future in your eyes. Every time I came home and you smiled like my arrival was the best part of your day. I fell in love with you 1,000 times over. I knew I loved you the day you offered to leave everything and run away with me," Vivian said. "When I realized you would sacrifice your home, your life, everything, just to keep me safe. That was when I understood that what I felt was not just gratitude or friendship, but love. Deep, abiding, forever love." The sun sank below the horizon and the first stars appeared. They went inside eventually to the home they had built and filled with love. They climbed into the bed they had shared for decades and wrapped around each other in the familiar embrace that had become as necessary as breathing. "I love you," Vivian whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Isaac replied, as he had every night for over 40 years. Forever and always. They fell asleep that way, two souls intertwined, a cowboy and the stranger who had walked into his kitchen and changed his life forever. Outside, the Arizona desert stretched away under an endless expanse of stars, and the ranch they had built together stood strong against the night. Isaac Harlow passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1932, at the age of 75. He died as he had lived the last half of his life, with Vivian beside him, holding his hand. His last words were, "Thank you for breakfast," and Vivian had laughed through her tears and kissed his forehead and told him she would make it for him again someday. Vivian lived another 8 years, surrounded by the family she and Isaac had built together. She spent her days telling stories to her great-grandchildren about their grandfather, about the ranch, about the life they had created from nothing but love and hard work and determination. She continued to run Henderson House, giving women the same chance she had been given so long ago. She passed away in her sleep on a summer night in 1940, at the age of 79. Her children and grandchildren found her the next morning, a peaceful smile on her face, her hand outstretched as though reaching for someone who was no longer there. On her bedside table was an old photograph from their wedding day, Isaac standing tall and proud beside his bride, both of them young and full of hope for the future they would build together. The ranch continued on, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story that had begun that morning in 1883, when a cowboy woke to find a stranger cooking breakfast in his kitchen. The house stood strong, expanded and modernized over the years, but still fundamentally the same home that Isaac and Vivian had filled with love and laughter. And sometimes, on quiet summer evenings when the desert air is cool and the stars are bright overhead, people swear they can see two figures sitting on the old porch, holding hands and watching the sunset together. A cowboy and his bride, choosing each other still, even beyond the boundaries of life and death. Their love story had become legend in Prescott, passed down through generations, A reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is accept kindness from a stranger. Sit down and share a meal. Because you never know when that simple act might change everything, might lead to a love that transcends time itself, might build a legacy that lasts forever.